There's an equation that nobody at the Pentagon likes to say out loud. Every missile the Houthis fire from Yemen costs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000, sometimes less. Simple projectiles, cheap, built with Iranian transferred technology, assembled in warehouses that Western intelligence services can barely locate on a map. The missile that goes up on the other side, the one that intercepts it, costs between $4 and $35 million. You read that right. That's not a typo. That's not an anxious analyst inflating numbers for attention. That is the real figure, documented, confirmed by Department of Defense budget filings, acknowledged by Congress itself. And that equation, that grotesque imbalance between the cost of attacking and the cost of defending, is exactly the beating heart of what's happening in the Red Sea right now. This isn't just a shipping disruption. It isn't just a regional militia causing headaches. It is a live experiment testing the limits of American naval power. And the results are making very important people in Washington deeply uncomfortable. When the Houthis began attacking ships in the Red Sea in November 2023, the initial reaction from the Western world was a mixture of skepticism and dismissal. Who are these guys exactly? An armed group in Yemen, a country shattered by a civil war that has dragged on for over a decade. No navy, no meaningful air force, no economy capable of sustaining a prolonged conflict against the greatest military powers on Earth. The logic seemed airtight. They'll miss, lose equipment, expose themselves, and American forces will silence them within weeks. That logic was wrong. Not because of naivety exactly, but because it rested on an assumption that the 21st century is systematically dismantling, that conventional military power still equals strategic control, that having the biggest ships, the most sophisticated missiles, and the best-trained pilots on the planet necessarily means you dominate the field. The Houthis didn't need to win battles. They needed to do one thing only: make the cost of being there too high. Between late 2023 and early 2025, the group launched more than 500 attacks against vessels in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. 500 in just over a year. Low-cost drones, anti-ship missiles, ballistic missiles, a blend of Iranian technology and local improvisation, fired from mobile positions that are hard to track and even harder to neutralize preemptively. The American Navy responded. It had to. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, sophisticated warships, each valued at roughly $2 billion, spent months intercepting threats over the Red Sea. The USS Laboon became the first warship in history to shoot down a ballistic missile in actual combat. A stunning technical achievement, and a staggeringly expensive one, because every interception burns through munitions that take years to replace. The SM-3 interceptors used against ballistic threats cost between $10 and $35 million per unit, depending on the variant. The SM-6, more versatile, runs close to $5 million each. And Raytheon, the company that manufactures them, cannot simply double production overnight. The SM-3 line has been refined over decades of engineering. This is not a bolt factory. Admiral James Kilby told Congress, without softening the language, that Red Sea operations had highlighted the strain on our munitions industrial base. That sentence, spoken by a four-star admiral before the House Appropriations Committee, is worth more than any think tank analysis. It is an institutional admission. Stockpiles are being consumed faster than industry can replenish them. And here is the detail that changes everything. This is not an accident. This is not an unforeseen consequence of a campaign that spun out of control. This is the strategy. Iran, which funds, trains, and arms the Houthis, understand something that many Western analysts still resist acknowledging. 21st century warfare is not fought only on battlefields. It is fought on production lines, in budget spreadsheets, in committee rooms where generals have to explain to lawmakers why missile stockpiles are shrinking. The goal is not to destroy the American Navy. That would be impossible. The goal is to exhaust it, to force it to spend enormous resources defending commercial routes that cost a fraction of that to attack, to create a cycle where every successful interception represents, paradoxically, a small strategic victory for the other side. You spend 30 million. I spent 50,000. How many times can you keep doing that? The global trade numbers tell you exactly what's at stake. The Red Sea, together with the Suez Canal, accounts for roughly 12% of all world trade. $1 trillion in cargo moves through that corridor every year. Oil, grain, electronics, manufactured goods, refrigerated shipments, the artery connecting Asia to Europe and back again. When the attacks intensified, the world's largest shipping companies simply rerouted their vessels. The alternative path, going around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, adds between 10 and 14 days of sailing. Each extra day means more fuel, more crew costs, more time, higher insurance premiums. Freight rates spiked. Maritime insurance for that region hit levels not seen in decades. Traffic through the Bab al-Mandab Strait, the gateway to the Red Sea, dropped sharply. The Suez Canal, one of Egypt's largest sources of national revenue, saw its income collapse. A militia with no navy, operating from one of the poorest countries on Earth, forced the rerouting of a significant portion of global commerce. Let that settle for a moment. In March 2025, President Trump ordered the launch of sustained military operations against the Houthis in Yemen. Not pinprick responses anymore. A campaign. The USS Harry S. Truman, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, spent months operating in the region. Fighter jets flew dozens of sorties. Command centers were struck. Weapons depots were destroyed. Identified missile launchers were eliminated. And the Houthis kept firing. Not because they were invincible, but because they had what any asymmetric force needs to survive a conventional campaign: redundancy, dispersion, patience, and a steady resupply flow from outside. Iran didn't stop shipping weapons. The supply routes held, and every destroyed launcher was replaced by another in a different location. By November 2025, the attacks slowed, a pause linked to a fragile ceasefire in Gaza. The world exhaled. By March 2026, right now, the threats are back. Two senior Houthi officials confirmed the intention to resume operations in response to fresh Israeli and American strikes against Iran. The Baltic and International Maritime Council, the world's largest shipping association, issued an immediate warning. Vessels with any connection to American or Israeli interests face elevated risk. The pause is over. But there's a dimension that most coverage completely ignores. While the United States was spending billions intercepting cheap drones and missiles over the Red Sea, observers in Beijing were taking notes with near-surgical attention. China doesn't need to invent ways to erode American naval power. Someone else is running that experiment in real time, and the results are being cataloged. What is the SM-3 consumption rate during high-intensity operations? How long does replenishment take? How many destroyers can operate simultaneously in threat zones before rotation becomes unsustainable? What is the domestic political cost, inside the U.S., of keeping forces projected indefinitely in low-resolution conflict zones with no clear endgame? These are not abstract questions for a state that has Taiwan on its strategic horizon. In March 2026, the Missile Defense Agency approved a new $266.9 million contract with Raytheon for additional SM-3 Block IB production. 23 extra units, total 78 missiles. Work expected to be completed by May 2030, 23 missiles, in 4 years. For context, during Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel in October 2024, roughly a dozen SM-3s were used in a matter of hours. In a single night of intense operations. The math doesn't close. And beneath all of this, beneath the numbers, the trade routes, the defense budgets, the strategy sessions, there are people. Sailors spending months away from home on ships that have become targets. Port workers in Egypt who lost income when Suez traffic collapsed. Communities in Yemen paying the price of American airstrikes with destruction layered on top of infrastructure that was already in ruins. Families around the world paying more for products that used to arrive through faster, cheaper routes. No major power accounts for those costs in its strategic reports. The Iranian people did not choose to fund this war. The Yemeni people did not choose to become a piece on a board designed by others. The 22-year-old American sailor didn't decide that Strait was worth months of his life away from everyone he knows. When states play geopolitical chess, it is always real, specific human beings who pay the bill. The Red Sea is not closed, but it isn't open either, not the way it was before. And that gray zone, that permanent state of managed threat, controlled instability, a crisis that never fully explodes but never resolves, may be exactly the objective. Not winning, not losing, bleeding. The question Washington hasn't answered clearly is, until when? How long is it worth keeping billion-dollar destroyers intercepting $50,000 drones? How long does the economic equation hold? How long does the American public accept the cost without seeing a clear result? Those questions don't have easy answers. And anyone who thinks they do probably isn't looking at the right numbers. The imbalance is there, documented, real. And it says something about the kind of war the 21st century is building. A war where the weaker side doesn't need to win. It just needs to make the cost of fighting too high for the stronger one. If you think this only matters to military strategists and foreign policy analysts, think again. Because what happens in that strait affects the price of what you buy, the fuel you use, the stability of entire regions you've never visited. The sea America can't close is a mirror. And what it reflects, for anyone with the courage to look, is not comfortable. If this changed how you think about modern warfare, drop a comment below. What part hit you hardest? And if you want to understand how this same logic is playing out in other corners of the world, the next video is already on its way.